The Wield Foundation is a charitable trust that was established in 2003. Its primary objective is to preserve and restore historically significant military vehicles and equipment. Its mission is to educate the public about the history of these vehicles and their role in military conflicts.
The Wield Foundation is made up of 3 separate parts. Firstly, the German collection, of which we are largely complete now, and the majority of that focus was on reconnaissance vehicles. We've subsequently moved on, when we had the opportunity, to the First World War, and the vehicles representing that collection are the Renault FT and the Renault TSF, both assembled and used in the First World War. The third part of the collection is actually the Empire collection. And that represents vehicles that were designed, developed, and built within countries of the old empire, today's Commonwealth. The first vehicles that we have selected as a result of that is the Australian Local Pattern 1 Carrier. That is the vehicle with which the Australian Army went to fight the Germans in Greece and in North Africa. And that is something which, when we were given the opportunity to secure an LP1, was just too good to ignore. So this is an Australian Local Pattern 1 Carrier. This is what we would term a Bren carrier in this country, or what comes to mind as a Bren carrier. But this particular carrier has a Vickers machine gun mounted in it. In the late 30s, the Australian government commissioned the research and development into producing their own carriers, so to speak. And this whole project was hastened, obviously, when Britain could no longer supply either the Australians or anybody in the empire, the old empire, the colonies, with components, with parts, with know-how that would previously have been provided. So the LP1 is completely home designed and home developed. There are only 158 of these built, and this is number 76. This vehicle here, it doesn't look like much right now, but when you see the finished item, this really is quite a spectacular achievement of local know-how. Good afternoon, Hilary. Thank you very much for being able to join this discussion. You, the person that have done the research into the industrial history, which basically surrounds the LP1 Carrier project, thank you very much for your participation. I'm quite excited about what's going to come out today.
I find this very interesting because the really exciting thing about an Australian LP1 Carrier is it represents this huge industrial history of trying to get started on a very complex area without the benefit of a previous automotive industry producing any type of armoured or heavy vehicle before. There was this particular individual called Geoffrey Street. He was a brigadier in the Australian Army. He had been concerned about how prepared Australia would be in the event of an outbreak of war. He decided to start a program where they would start building some of their own vehicles. And he organised in 1938 to buy a machine gun carrier from England. It actually was a Morris-made carrier, but of course to the Vickers pattern. Testing it and so forth, they decided that it would make more sense for them to beef up this carrier to make it stronger for the terrain that they would be expecting to be operating in. But it became clear that that might be a problem. So they set about designing and developing their own local pattern carrier. But then the outbreak of hostilities in Europe came. And after the defeat in France and the evacuation from Dunkirk, there was a grave shortage of nickel and other alloys for use in the armour plate. So that really threw a spanner in the works, because now Australia couldn't get the alloys that they needed to make the armour plate. So they curtailed the production of what became known as the local pattern 1 Carrier to the original order for 160. In fact, I think about 158 got built, and they looked at what the improvements that could be made to their carrier, and how on earth they could fill in this problem of where to get armour from. In the meantime, unfortunately, Street was killed in an aircraft crash in 1940, so his involvement disappeared in the project. But by that stage, things were well geared up. They built over 5,500 of these LP2 carriers subsequently, so it was a massive enterprise.
And then the specifics about our own LP1. When the steel had obviously been provided, where were these then assembled?
The armour for the LP1s was done by Commonwealth Steel. They were more committed to naval production. The actual assembly work was done by Victorian Railways at Newport Works. That's where the first 160 were produced. And our one, as you know, is number 76.
There were differences, weren't there, that we've managed to study thus far between the LP1s, the early LP1s, and then the later LP1s.
Yeah, there's a series of changes occur over the 160, because it was the beginning of the first heavy armoured vehicle project, and visibly the first thing you notice is that the first 10 or 15, I don't know what exact number, had a tow bar with a big spring on the back, because it was intended to be towing things, but they decided that wasn't a good idea, and that was knocked off. So there's little changes occurring over the life of the project. So our one is dead in the middle of this with number 76.
And also, when the Australians were involved in the Greek campaign and subsequently pulled back from Greece and went to North Africa, there were a number of LP1s delivered to North Africa.
Yes, there was at least one unit had them. I think at least 15 carriers were in North Africa.
And what makes the history even more interesting is obviously what happened with the Australians when they decided, well, they had to actually leave North Africa in order to come and defend their own country, because remember, the Japanese at that time,
yes, exactly, yes,
threatening Australia.
Yeah.
And that's why some of these surviving LP1s, or some of the LP1s at that time, were sent up to Darwin.
Right, yeah.
Because Darwin actually came under attack, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Yes, they were very concerned there was going to be a landing there.
So that's where some of them have actually survived, where some LP1 examples survived that were originally sent up to Darwin. But our one, we don't know anything specifically about its history at this stage. We haven't discovered anything, apart from obviously where it was in that in the official record, 1941 or 1942. The thing to remember in all of this is the condition of the vehicle that you are getting. Now, when anybody else would look at something like this, they would be quite horrified, given what's actually happened to it, given the cutouts and the additional armour plate that people have actually put in order to make the chassis longer. In the past, what was this used for? Okay, that's a question we can answer later. But this is actually pretty largely complete. The problem with this vehicle is, as with any other vehicle, are the changes that have actually been made, or modifications to the vehicle that have been made over time. So we need to rectify those, identify those first of all, and then remedy those changes. So take them out, because what we want to do is bring this vehicle back to the state it was in when it actually left the assembly line.
Any 60, 70-year-old vehicle that someone's used on a farm or building site or something, you'll find it's modified to suit what they want to do, because it wasn't built to do what they want to do, so they modify it to make it work. And we have to reverse all that Fortunately, we know exactly what the original dimensions of the thing was, and we know what size the actual body was, because all that data is stored. So we measure what we got and say, well, clearly this thing's 2 foot longer than it should be. So then we look for where the 2 foot's been put in, and then we have to take that 2 feet out and shrink it back to the original.
What Martin's done in all of this is put all of the components that are, let's say, necessary for what the project, for what we need now in the project, into the drawing.
50 years ago, I used to do this with a bit of paper and a pencil and a T-square and a drawing board. Just that CAD makes it so much quicker and so much easier to put. Well, you can move things about. You can pick things up and put them together. But, I mean, this, if I wanted to put that brake drum on, for instance, I could actually pick it up and move it.
What this will do is give a very clear idea for where we need to take what we have to the desired end example. And without using AutoCAD, you can't do it. I mean, otherwise, it's pure imagination or, as you say, bits of paper. And that simply isn't good enough because you don't know whether the items that are actually on the piece of paper will ultimately go together again or fit together again as a single vehicle unless you draw it. We're talking about a very rare vehicle. So what are we going to rely on? We have to rely on those people who've done work before us in actually either collecting these vehicles, restoring these vehicles, or people who've actually got parts for these vehicles. One of the very helpful individuals that we've been working with is Darren Wright. And Darren has actually spent a long time, many, many years, actually gathering information about all of those different surviving LP1s and obviously the people that have them, and has collated an enormous amount of photos, imagery and everything else with the help of those people. You've been all over your country recording these surviving LP1s?
Yeah, I have. I really only started, I guess, in about 2015, I think, thereabouts, when I found mine. But previous to that, I helped a good friend of mine up in Darwin with a bit of information. And I found some parts for his project, which he then went and bought. And then a couple of years later, I happened to find an LP1 bring-on carrier that could have done with those parts, but he's now got them. So that's when I really started to focus in on have a look at the history of the LP1 bring-on carrier.
Tell me, how collegiate has the attitude been amongst the collectors? How well do these guys work together? How good is your group? Is everyone sharing information, or is it slightly cagey?
Slightly cagey. When you know someone that's got a LP1 bring-on carrier, people are actually really forthcoming with information and very helpful. But a lot of people don't go outside of that network. They only made 158 vehicles, not a great deal of spare parts. What's out there is what's out there, and it's very hard to find anything. So that's part of what makes it a little bit hard. But bringing together the group, communicating with them, sharing sheet metal, sharing information, that helped everyone. So whilst I was helping myself, it also provided information because I shared all the information with everyone else so that when it comes time for their restoration projects, that they've got reference photos of everyone else's LP1 bring-on carriers.
Fantastic. And by the way, your help is your advice and your information that you've been passing back to us is extremely well received. So thank you very much for all that you've been doing. Each LP1 was given a station reference insofar as the defence of Australia was concerned. So each one of these vehicles was posted to a specific region or area in order to provide home defence. When they were declared obsolete, this is what happened with them after their operational existence, put it that way.
There was a batch of 10 bring-on carriers that went to Darwin,
Yes.
and LP1 bring-on carriers did go to different units around Australia. The tank training at School of Armour Puckapunyal also received a number of Vickers light tanks and LP1 bring-on carriers for training. I believe my hull number was utilised down in Melbourne for various testing and evaluation trials. And yes, a number of other bring-own carriers did get moved out to units just to give them equipment. Also, there's a couple of photos that survive of LP1s participating in street parades for war bonds and creating awareness and fundraising for the war. But it's very hard to track the details of where certain vehicles went, because our Army registration records for all the vehicles don't actually list or detail the units that they went to. They list like hull number, chassis number, engine numbers, perhaps date introduced into service, definitely the disposal date or when the vehicle's destroyed or written off, but they don't give a great deal of information. It's only if you get extremely lucky reading a unit war diary or some other information that starts to connect and create the picture of where vehicles could have been, or if you actually get lucky and have a picture of your actual vehicle.
Does anybody come across a picture of their individual vehicle?
That photo that I got from you when we visited, the one showing the workshop, the high-res photo, I managed to have a look at that. And during manufacture at Newport Railway Workshops, all the vehicles had a little black disc on the rear of them with their hull number. And when you look at the series of photos and that, and it's all the vehicles in the 70 number range. There's probably about 6-7 vehicles there. And I believe the Wield Foundation's hull number 76 is there. And I believe my vehicle, hull number 73, is at the closest end to the camera.
Well, Darren, look, thank you again.
Right.
And
okay.
we'll talk soon. Have a good
All right,
weekend.
no worries.
Without this vehicle, you can't really tell the story of 1940. If you don't have the original engine in it, if you don't have the original gearbox in it, if you don't have the original instrument cluster in it, if it doesn't look like it did back in 1940. So when it drives past, are you really going to give a good impression of exactly what people experienced, heard, and smelt at the time that this thing was running back in 1940? No, you won't. So therefore, this thing has to be put back together in the form it was, as accurately as possible, taken back to 1940.
It's not just an armoured carrier that gets restored and gets shown at shows or anything like that. It brings with it all of this baggage of this fantastically interesting history as to how these colonies managed to survive in the early part of the war, and the innovation and so forth that was carried out by their steel industries and so forth to get going.
The Empire Collection is important to us as an organisation because it fills gaps in the national collection. It also addresses the imbalance of representation of Australia, India, or South Africa insofar as the national collection is concerned. It addresses the conventional understanding of what made up the British Army. The story of those countries' contribution to the war needs to be split away from the British Army and understood for the countries that they represented. And that's what we hope to do.